A millionaire rushes into the building where he is about to sign the biggest contract of his life. Suddenly, a poor girl stops him and shouts, "Don't get in that elevator!" He hesitates, but seconds later something happens that shocks everyone in the building. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The glass and steel of the Harrington Tower reflected the morning sun, casting a golden glow over the bustling streets of Manhattan. Inside the pristine lobby, Richard Harrington checked his Patek Philippe watch for the third time in 5 minutes. At 45, Rick to the few who dared claim familiarity, had mastered the art of intimidation through efficiency. Every second was money, and today, those seconds were worth millions. The Singapore investors are already in the conference room, Mr. Harrington. Martha, his executive assistant, reminded him through his earpiece. Mr. Chen specifically mentioned he has another appointment at noon. I'm aware, Rick replied, his voice clipped. Technical difficulty with the elevator. I'll be there momentarily. Rick adjusted his custom-tailored suit and gripped his leather briefcase tighter. This merger would be the crowning achievement of his career, the deal that would finally silence those who whispered he was riding on his late father's legacy. William Harrington had built Harrington Investments from nothing, but Rick was about to transform it into a global powerhouse. As he strode toward the executive elevator, the one reserved for penthouse offices, Rick mentally rehearsed his presentation. The numbers were flawless, the projections conservative yet impressive. After today, Harrington Investments would expand its reach across 3 continents. Wait, please don't take that elevator. The high-pitched voice cut through his concentration. Rick turned to see a small figure darting across the marble lobby, dodging around bewildered business people. A girl, no older than 12, wearing a faded blue hoodie several sizes too large and jeans with patches at the knees. Her sneakers were worn nearly through, and her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. The security guard at the front desk was already moving toward her. "Sir, I'm sorry," the guard began. Rick waved him off, irritation rising. "What's the meaning of this?" The girl skidded to a stop before him, breathing hard. Despite her disheveled appearance, her eyes were clear and intelligent. "Please," she said between breaths, "don't take that elevator, it's not safe." "Excuse me?" Rick couldn't hide his annoyance. The security guard hovered uncertainly behind her. "I heard the maintenance guys talking. There's something wrong with the cable. They said it could snap any minute." Her voice trembled but remained firm. "Please, just take the other elevator." Rick assessed her quickly. Dirty clothes, unwashed face, likely homeless, probably trying to create a distraction for some scheme. Manhattan was full of such scams. "Young lady, I don't have time for this. Security, please escort her outside." He pressed the elevator call button. "No!" The girl lunged forward, grabbing his briefcase. "You can't." "Let go!" Rick yanked back, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "This is ridiculous." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Rick pulled harder, finally freeing his briefcase from her grasp, but the force sent him stumbling backward. The briefcase fell, papers spilling across the marble floor. "Now look what you've—" Rick began, but his words were cut short by a horrific sound. A metallic screech, followed by a tremendous crash that shook the entire lobby. The elevator had plummeted. People screamed, security guards rushed forward, and Rick stood frozen, staring at the open elevator doors and the dark, empty shaft beyond. "I tried to tell you," the girl whispered, eyes wide with shock despite her vindication. Rick turned to her, his face drained of color. "How did you know?" Before she could answer, Martha's voice came through his earpiece, now frantic. "Mr. Harrington, are you all right? We heard a crash." Rick pressed his finger to the earpiece. "I'm fine. There's been an incident with the elevator. Call emergency services and reschedule the meeting." He paused, looking at the girl who had just saved his life. "Actually, clear my schedule for the day." "The entire day?" Martha couldn't hide her shock. "But the Singapore—" "The entire day," Rick repeated firmly. As chaos erupted around them, Rick found himself oddly calm. He knelt to gather his scattered papers, and to his surprise, the girl began helping him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she replied, carefully stacking the documents. "Lily Watson." "Well, Lily Watson, you just saved my life. I think that earns you breakfast, at least." He studied her face, noting a certain familiarity he couldn't place. "Are your parents nearby?" A shadow crossed her face. "Just my mum. She's resting in the park across the street." Rick nodded, understanding the euphemism. Homeless, as he'd suspected. "Let's get her too." 30 minutes later, Rick sat across from Lily and her mother, Sarah, in a quiet corner of an upscale diner. Sarah Watson was thin to the point of gauntness, with the same intelligent eyes as her daughter, though hers were shadowed by exhaustion and worry. She wore layers of mismatched clothes, practical for someone living on the streets, and kept her hands wrapped around a coffee mug as though afraid someone might take it away. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice soft but dignified. "Why would you want to help us?" Rick studied her face, that nagging sense of recognition growing stronger. "Your daughter saved my life today. I owe her a debt." Lily, halfway through a stack of pancakes, looked up. "We've been staying near your building for about 3 months now. The security guards let me use the bathroom sometimes when it's raining." 3 months? Rick frowned. "What happened before that?" Sarah hesitated, exchanging a glance with her daughter. "We had an apartment in Queens. I worked as a housekeeper for several families in Manhattan, but I got sick, pneumonia, and missed too many days. We fell behind on rent and—" She shrugged, the gesture conveying everything words couldn't. Rick nodded, a pang of something unfamiliar, guilt, perhaps, stirring in his chest. "And your husband?" "There hasn't been one for a long time," Sarah replied simply. As they spoke, Rick continued to study Sarah's face. There was something about her, something in the way she held herself, the quiet dignity despite her circumstances. "Have we met before, Mrs. Watson?" he finally asked. Sarah's eyes met his, and for a moment, something like recognition flickered there before she looked away. "Many people ask that. I worked in a lot of homes across Manhattan." Before Rick could press further, his phone rang Martha again. He silenced it without looking. "Mr. Harrington," Lily said, finishing her orange juice, "why are rich people always in such a hurry?" The question caught him off guard. "Excuse me, you're always rushing. You and all the other people in suits, always checking watches and phones, never looking at anything else." Her observation was startling in its simplicity and accuracy. Rick opened his mouth to deliver a practiced response about efficiency and productivity, but instead found himself saying, "I don't know, Lily. I honestly don't know anymore." As he spoke those words, something shifted inside him, a hairline crack in the foundation of certainty he'd built his life upon. His phone buzzed again, but for the first time in years, Richard Harrington let it go unanswered. Outside the diner windows, Manhattan continued its relentless pace, but inside, 3 people sat in a moment of unexpected connection, a wealthy businessman and 2 homeless strangers, brought together by a near catastrophe and a child's warning. None of them yet realized how this chance encounter would soon unravel and reweave the fabric of their lives. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The revelation hit Rick like a physical blow. "You're Sarah Watson." His voice had dropped to a whisper. "You worked for my family, for my father." They were now sitting in a private room at the back of the restaurant, which the owner had eagerly provided once he recognized Richard Harrington. Sarah's hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. "Yes," she admitted, "for almost 15 years. Rick leaned back in his chair, memories cascading through his mind. Sarah Watson had been more than their housekeeper. She had practically raised him after his mother's departure when he was 8. She'd attended his high school graduation, made his favorite meals when he came home from college, comforted him after his first heartbreak, and he had fired her the day after his father's funeral. "I didn't recognize you," he said, the words hollow even to his own ears. "It's been 7 years, Sarah replied. Her voice held no accusation, which somehow made it worse. "People change." Lily looked between them, her young face serious. "Mom never told me she worked for you." "She was more than an employee," Rick said, guilt wrapping around his throat like a vice. "She was family." Sarah's eyes flashed. "Until I wasn't," the memory returned with painful clarity. 29 years old, newly in charge of Harrington Investments, determined to prove himself. Streamlining operations, he'd called it, replacing long-term staff with a modern service company. All employees had received severance packages, generous by any standard but impersonal, Clinical. What happened to the money? He asked. Sarah straightened her spine. There was the medical debt from my mother's cancer treatment, then college savings for Lily. The rest lasted about 3 years. You have a daughter in college? Rick was confused. No, Sarah said softly. Lily is my youngest. Jessica is 20 now, studying nursing at QNY. Rick felt the ground shift beneath him again. I didn't know you had children. You never asked, Sarah replied simply. The truth of that statement hit him harder than any accusation. For 15 years, this woman had cared for him, yet he'd never bothered to learn the most basic facts about her life. Your father knew, Sarah added. He paid for Jessica's braces, came to Lily's kindergarten graduation. Rick's phone buzzed again, the 4th time in the last hour. He silenced it without looking. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words inadequate but necessary. What I did was callous. It was business, Sarah replied, her dignity intact despite everything. That's what you told me then. A strained silence fell over the table. Lily, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. We're not the only ones, you know, she said, picking at the remainder of her pancakes. There are others. Others? Rick asked. Kids, around your building. Some have parents, some don't. We look out for each other. Rick studied her face, so young, yet marked by a wisdom no child should have to acquire. How many? Lily shrugged. Depends on the weather. Maybe 15 regulars, more when it gets cold. 15 children, living on the streets around his gleaming tower. The very thought was inconceivable. Show me, he said. 2 hours later, Rick Harrington found himself in places he'd never imagined visiting. The hidden corners of Bryant Park, the overlooked alcoves behind luxury retailers, the makeshift shelters beneath scaffolding, and everywhere children, some as young as 8, others in their mid-teens, surviving through a combination of ingenuity, community, and sheer determination. There was Max, a serious 13-year-old who'd fled an abusive foster home, twins Emma and Ethan, whose mother was battling addiction, quiet Zoe, who carried a backpack full of worn books and did her homework by streetlight, and a dozen others, each with their own story of how the system had failed them. They approached Lily with easy familiarity, eyeing Rick with understandable suspicion. A man in a $3,000 suit did not belong in their world. He's okay, Lily assured them. He's helping us today. Why? Asked Max, the self-appointed guardian of the group. His eyes narrowed in distrust. It was a fair question, one Rick wasn't sure he could answer. Why indeed? He'd spent his adult life in pursuit of wealth and status, measuring success in acquisitions and profit margins. These children, these struggles, they weren't his concern. Yet here he stood, his merger forgotten, watching as Lily distributed food she'd saved from breakfast to those who looked hungriest. Mr. Harrington owns the big building on 5th, Lily explained, the one with the fountain in the lobby. Fancy, Emma said, her voice both impressed and accusatory. Do you have a swimming pool up there too? No swimming pool, Rick replied, finding his voice. Just a lot of offices and people who think they're very important. Are you important? Zoe asked, looking up from her dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Rick considered the question. I used to think so. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. We should go, Lily. Mr. Harrington has seen enough. Actually, Rick said, I haven't. He spent the rest of the day with them, walking the streets of Midtown Manhattan with new eyes. He bought meals for the children, listened to their stories, witnessed their daily struggles. He saw how Lily was respected among them, not just liked but looked up to despite her age. She knew which restaurants would give away unsold food at closing time, which security guards would turn a blind eye to kids sheltering in loading docks during rainstorms, which public bathrooms were safest. By late afternoon, his phone had stopped ringing. Martha had given up, likely assuming some emergency had befallen him. The Singapore investors had surely left, the deal possibly lost. Strangely, Rick found he didn't care. As dusk fell, he invited Sarah and Lily to dinner, but Sarah shook her head. We need to find a place for the night, she explained, the practiced evenness of her voice not quite hiding her exhaustion. The shelter on 28th fills up quickly. Rick looked at his watch, the same watch that this morning had seemed so important. I have a better idea, he said. 30 minutes later, they were riding the service elevator to the penthouse of Harrington Tower. Rick had made a few calls, arranging for immediate housekeeping service and food delivery. "You can stay in the guest suite," he explained as they stepped into his apartment, "at least until we figure out something more permanent." The space was exactly what one would expect from a successful bachelor's Manhattan penthouse, expansive, meticulously designed, and utterly impersonal. No photographs, no mementos, nothing to suggest the personality of its occupant. "It's very clean," Sarah observed diplomatically. Lily was less restrained. "It looks like a hotel," she said, running her hand over the pristine white sofa. "Do you actually live here?" Rick looked around, seeing his home through their eyes. "I suppose I just sleep here." The food arrived, enough for 10 people, though Rick had only specified family-style dinner. As they ate at his rarely used dining table, he found himself more relaxed than he'd been in years. The conversation flowed easily, centered mostly around Lily's observations of life in the building. "The lady on the 14th floor sneaks her cat in every day in a special purse," she reported, reaching for another breadstick. "And the man who works at the coffee shop in the lobby gives away free pastries to old people when his boss isn't looking." "How do you know all this?" Rick asked, genuinely curious. Lily shrugged. "I watch. Nobody notices kids like me, so I see everything." After dinner, Rick showed them to the guest suite, a bedroom with an adjoining sitting area and private bathroom. "There are clean clothes in the drawers," he said. "The housekeeper brought them. They might not fit perfectly, but they're better than nothing for now." Sarah stood in the center of the room, her expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" It was the same question Max had asked earlier, and Rick still wasn't sure of the answer. "Your daughter saved my life. And this is payment?" There was no judgment in her tone, only curiosity. Rick considered the question. "No," he said finally. "This is awakening." Later, after Sarah and Lily had retired for the night, Rick sat in his home office staring at his silent phone. 27 missed calls, 42 text messages, 8 increasingly urgent emails from Martha. The Singapore deal was unraveling. The investors were offended by his absence. The board was calling an emergency meeting. 7 years ago, this would have been unthinkable, a career-ending disaster. Tonight, Rick found it difficult to care. Something fundamental had shifted in his worldview, as though he'd been living in a house with all the curtains drawn, and someone had suddenly thrown them open. He picked up his phone and dialed Martha's number. "Rick?" She answered immediately, her voice thick with worry. "Are you all right? What happened?" "I'm fine," he assured her. "But I need you to do something important first thing tomorrow morning." "Anything," Martha said, relief evident in her voice. "The board meeting is at 9, and I've already drafted talking points to salvage the Singapore—" "Not that," Rick interrupted. "I need you to research how to legally establish a charitable foundation, and I'll need $50 million transferred from my personal accounts." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "Martha, are you there?" "Yes," she said finally. "Just making sure I heard you correctly. Did you say $50 million? "Yes," Rick confirmed, surprising himself with his certainty. "And find out what permits we'd need to convert the 14th floor conference rooms into temporary housing." "Housing? In the office building?" Martha's voice had risen an octave. "Rick, are you sure you're all right?" Rick looked out his window at the glittering Manhattan skyline, thinking of the children sleeping in shadows beneath those lights. "For the first time in a very long time, Martha," he said quietly, "I think I might be. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going." The Harrington Towers 42nd floor boardroom had never felt so hostile. Rick sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, 11 pairs of eyes fixed on him with expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. "Let me get this straight," said Victor Blackwell, the eldest board member and his father's oldest friend. "You abandoned a $60 million deal with Singapore to help homeless children?" Rick met his gaze steadily. "I'm not abandoning the deal. I've rescheduled with Mr. Chen for next week." "After you insulted him by not showing up," interjected Diane Foster, head of international acquisitions. "The Singaporeans place enormous value on punctuality and respect." "A mechanical failure nearly killed me yesterday," Rick replied evenly. "I think that warrants a schedule adjustment." "And this?" Victor consulted the document before him. "Harrington Community Foundation, $50 million of your personal funds." That's correct. And the proposal to convert our 14th floor conference spaces into, what did you call it? Temporary housing and educational facilities. Rick leaned forward. We have 15,000 square feet of underutilized space. The East Wing conference rooms are booked less than 20% of the time. Jonathan Pierce, Rick's longtime rival and the company's COO, spoke for the first time. This is completely unprecedented. The liability issues alone are manageable, Rick interrupted. Martha has already consulted with legal, with proper supervision and insurance. It's not just liability, Jonathan cut in, his voice smooth as silk and twice as slippery. It's image, perception. Do you think our high-net-worth clients want to ride the elevator with street children? The casual cruelty of the statement hung in the air. Rick felt something hardening inside him, resolve crystallizing into determination. They're children, Jonathan, not vermin. Of course they are, Jonathan backpedaled with practiced ease. I'm merely pointing out the practical considerations. Victor cleared his throat. Richard, no one is questioning your philanthropy. It's commendable, but perhaps a donation to an established shelter would be more appropriate. Rick looked around the table at these people he'd considered colleagues, even friends. Had they always been this disconnected from reality? Or had he simply never noticed because he was just like them? The foundation will happen regardless, he said firmly. It's my money. As for the space allocation, the building charter gives the majority shareholder discretion over common area usage. That's me. For now, Jonathan murmured, just loud enough to be heard. Rick ignored him. I've called this meeting as a courtesy, not to ask permission. The contractors start work on Monday. The meeting deteriorated from there. Objections were raised, thinly veiled threats made. By the time Rick returned to his office, he felt as though he'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight champion. Martha was waiting for him, a stack of documents in hand. Well, that sounded pleasant, she remarked, having heard most of the shouting through the door. They'll adjust, Rick replied, though he wasn't entirely convinced. What's the status on the foundation paperwork? Preliminary filing complete, Martha reported. The lawyers need another day for the full documentation, and the contractors are confirmed for Monday, though the building manager nearly had a coronary when I told him. Rick smiled for the first time that day. You're remarkably efficient at implementing crazy plans. 7 years as your assistant, Martha replied with a hint of a smile. I've had practice. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Harrington, there's a situation in the lobby, came the security guard's hesitant voice. Rick exchanged a glance with Martha. What kind of situation? A young girl is asking for you. Says her name is Lily Watson. Rick was already moving toward the door. I'll be right down. He found Lily standing in the center of the lobby, surrounded by a semicircle of security guards. Unlike yesterday, she wasn't alone. Max, the serious 13-year-old, stood beside her, along with the twins Emma and Ethan, and 2 other children Rick didn't recognize. Lily, he said, approaching the group, is everything all right? Where's your mother? Mom's at the apartment applying for jobs online, Lily explained. But we have an emergency. Max stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable but determined. Zoe's sick, really sick. She's been coughing all night and can't keep anything down. She needs a doctor, Emma added, her young face pinched with worry. But we don't have money and the free clinic doesn't open until Monday. Rick looked at the assembled children. Dirty clothes, solemn faces, eyes too old for their years. Where is she now? Bryant Park, Ethan said. Behind the library. Damon's watching her. Rick turned to the security guards. Call my car service, immediately. 20 minutes later, Rick found himself in the emergency room of New York Presbyterian Hospital, surrounded by children who regarded the clean, bright space with visible unease. Zoe, a tiny girl of 9 with tangled black hair, lay on a stretcher, her breathing labored, her cheeks flushed with fever. Pneumonia, the doctor confirmed after the examination, fairly advanced. She'll need to be admitted. Does she have insurance? The intake nurse asked, pen poised over her clipboard. Rick stepped forward. I'll cover all expenses. The nurse looked skeptical. And you are? Her uncle, Rick lied smoothly, producing his platinum credit card. Please ensure she receives the best care possible. As Zoe was wheeled away for treatment, the remaining children clustered in the waiting room, looking lost and out of place among the sterile furnishings. Is she going to be okay? Lily asked, her voice small. Yes, Rick assured her, hoping he was right. The doctors here are excellent. What happens when she gets better? Max asked, practical as always. She doesn't have anywhere to go. Rick didn't have an answer for that, not yet. Let's worry about getting her well first. While the children dozed in the waiting room chairs, Rick made a series of calls. First to Sarah, explaining the situation and asking her to bring fresh clothes for the children. Then to Martha, instructing her to expedite the renovations on the 14th floor. Finally, to his personal physician, arranging for checkups for all the children as soon as possible. It was nearly midnight when Sarah arrived, laden with shopping bags. I hope you don't mind, she said quietly, so as not to wake the sleeping children. I used the credit card you left. They needed everything. Of course, Rick said. How was the job hunting? Sarah sighed. 3 online applications, 2 immediate rejections. 7-year employment gap is apparently a red flag. The third wants an in-person interview next week at a restaurant in Soho. That's good news, Rick said encouragingly. It's a hostess position, Sarah replied, her voice carefully neutral. The ad specifically mentioned attractive young women preferred. Rick winced. I could make some calls. No, Sarah interrupted firmly. I appreciate everything you're doing, Rick, but I need to stand on my own feet. Her pride was intact, despite everything. Rick found himself admiring her resilience, even as he ached to make amends for his past callousness. Mom! Lily had awakened and rushed to embrace her mother. They took Zoe to a room upstairs. Mr. Harrington said he's paying for everything. Sarah's expression was complicated, gratitude warring with concern. That's very generous. It's the least I can do, Rick said. Listen, it's late. Why don't you take the kids back to the apartment? I'll stay with Zoe. Are you sure? Sarah asked. Positive. She shouldn't wake up alone in a strange place. After they left, Rick settled into the uncomfortable chair beside Zoe's hospital bed. The child looked impossibly small amid the tangle of IV lines and monitoring equipment. Her breathing was easier now, assisted by supplemental oxygen. How had he never noticed? The invisible children living in the shadows of his gleaming tower. The struggling families just one medical emergency away from ruin. Had he been that blind? Or had he simply chosen not to see? Rick dozed fitfully, waking to the soft sound of Zoe's voice. Are you an angel? She asked, her eyes fever bright. Rick smiled. No, just a friend. How are you feeling? Floaty, she admitted. Are the others okay? They're fine. Lily's mom took them to get some sleep. Zoe's brow furrowed. Will they send me back to the group home now? The question caught Rick off guard. Is that where you were before? Zoe nodded weakly. I ran away 3 months ago. The lady who ran it was mean. She took the money but didn't buy us food. Anger flared in Rick's chest. Not the cold, calculated anger he was familiar with from business dealings, but something hotter and more personal. No one's sending you back there, he promised. Rest now. By morning, Zoe's fever had broken. The doctor was cautiously optimistic, but insisted on keeping her for at least 2 more days. Rick arranged for the hospital's child life specialist to bring books and art supplies to keep her occupied. When he finally returned to his penthouse, he found organized chaos. Sarah had apparently spent the morning implementing a shower rotation for the children, who now sat around his dining table in clean clothes, devouring a breakfast of pancakes, eggs, and fruit that she had prepared. Mr. Harrington, Lily called when she spotted him. Is Zoe better? Much better, he assured her, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. She'll be out in a couple of days. Where will she go then? Max asked, his natural skepticism reasserting itself now that the immediate crisis had passed. It was a fair question, one that extended to all of them. The temporary solution of his guest rooms wouldn't work long term. I'm working on something, Rick said, a more permanent arrangement. Like a new shelter? Emma asked doubtfully. Better than a shelter, Rick promised. A home. Over the next 3 days, Rick divided his time between the hospital, the office, and overseeing the rapidly progressing renovations on the 14th floor. The contractors, incentivized by a substantial bonus for speed, worked around the clock. The Singapore investors, surprisingly, had agreed to reschedule after Martha explained the circumstances. The board members had retreated into sullen acceptance, though Rick noted Jonathan Pierce spending unusual amounts of time in closed-door meetings with people who weren't Harrington employees. On Tuesday afternoon, Rick was reviewing the Foundation's articles of incorporation when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Harrington?" The voice was female, professionally brisk. "This is Councilwoman Patricia Morgan's office. The Councilwoman would like to meet with you regarding your project at Harrington Tower." Rick frowned. The city council member for their district wasn't known for her interest in corporate affairs, unless there was political capital to be gained. "Of course," he replied neutrally. "When would be convenient? The councilwoman happens to be in your neighborhood now. She could stop by within the hour." The lack of notice was deliberate, Rick knew. A power play designed to catch him unprepared. "I'll let security know to expect her." Exactly 47 minutes later, Patricia Morgan swept into his office. She was a polished woman in her 50s, with an expertly maintained appearance and the practiced smile of someone who had kissed thousands of babies while secretly disliking children. "Richard," she greeted him with a familiarity they didn't share. "How good to see you. It's been too long." "Councilwoman," he replied, gesturing to the visitor's chair. "What can I do for you?" She settled herself, smoothing her skirt. "I've been hearing some concerning rumors about your plans for Harrington Tower. Something about housing homeless individuals." "Children," Rick corrected. "And yes, we're converting underutilized conference space into transitional housing and educational facilities." Patricia's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. "While I appreciate your humanitarian impulses, there are zoning regulations to consider, building codes, safety protocols, all of which we're addressing," Rick assured her. "My legal team has been thorough." "Even so," she persisted, "the neighbors have concerns, property values, security issues." "The neighbors," Rick repeated. "You mean the other commercial tenants who occupy floors 18 through 39 and would never even see these children?" Patricia leaned forward. "Richard, let's be practical. These projects always sound noble in theory, but in practice, well, I'd hate to see regulatory hurdles delay your other business operations." The threat was transparent. Rick felt a flash of the old anger, cold, calculated, but now tempered with something new, righteous indignation. "Councilwoman," he said, his voice deceptively gentle, "are you suggesting that helping homeless children might result in selective enforcement of regulations against my company?" Patricia's smile tightened. "Of course not. I'm simply concerned about unintended consequences." "As am I," Rick replied. "For instance, the consequences of a front-page New York Times article about how a city official attempted to block aid to homeless children to protect property values." The color drained from Patricia's face. "That would be a gross mischaracterization." "Perhaps," Rick agreed, "but I'm finding that perception matters a great deal in these situations." The standoff lasted several seconds before Patricia rose. "I see we're approaching this from different perspectives. I hope you'll reconsider this project. For everyone's sake, the renovations will be complete by Friday," Rick informed her. "You're welcome to attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Excellent photo opportunity." After she left, Martha entered with a knowing look. "That went well." "We've made an enemy," Rick observed. "Not your first," Martha reminded him. "Probably not your last, given your new direction." Rick sighed. "Set up a meeting with our PR team. If we're going to do this, we need to control the narrative." As Martha turned to leave, Rick added, "And Martha, thank you for supporting this." She paused at the door. "My brother was homeless for 3 years after his discharge from the army," she said quietly. "No one would hire a veteran with PTSD. He lived under a bridge until a program like the one you're creating gave him a chance." She met his eyes. "So I should be thanking you." Left alone, Rick turned to the window, gazing out at the city sprawled below. Manhattan, island of glass and steel ambition, of extreme wealth and extreme poverty coexisting in carefully maintained separation. He'd spent his life building walls between those worlds. Now he was attempting to build bridges instead. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Zoe being released tomorrow. The others are painting welcome signs. Your kitchen may never recover." Rick smiled at the message, feeling something unfamiliar warm his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as happiness. Simple, unadorned happiness that had nothing to do with stock prices or profit margins. The sensation was so foreign it was almost frightening. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. Friday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect New York autumn day. The renovations on the 14th floor had been completed with remarkable speed, a testament to what unlimited resources and round-the-clock labor could accomplish. The space had been transformed. The sterile conference rooms were now bright, welcoming dormitories with privacy partitions and custom storage solutions. The executive lounge had become a communal kitchen and dining area. The presentation hall was now a classroom and activity center. There was even a small medical office where a volunteer pediatrician would hold weekly clinics. Rick walked through the space, Martha at his side, checking final details before the children arrived. "It's remarkable," Martha observed. "I never would have imagined this space could look so warm." Rick nodded, satisfaction washing over him. The designers outdid themselves. "The press will be here at noon," Martha reminded him. "The mayor's office called. He's sending a representative. Apparently, your project has garnered attention." "Positive or negative?" "Mixed," Martha admitted. "The Daily News is running with Billionaire's redemption. The Post went with Manhattan Madness. Tycoon turns tower into teen hostel." Rick laughed. "Could be worse." "It likely will be," Martha cautioned. Trevor Wilson from Channel 8 confirmed. He's not exactly known for balanced reporting. Trevor Wilson was New York's most notorious tabloid journalist, a man who had built his career on sensationalism and barely concealed character assassination. "Let him come," Rick said with more confidence than he felt. "We have nothing to hide." The elevator chimed and Sarah stepped out, followed by Lily and the other children. Zoe was with them, still looking pale but significantly improved. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, taking in the transformation. The children reacted with varying degrees of awe and suspicion. Some, like Lily and the twins, immediately began exploring, exclaiming over details like personalized cubbies and brand new books. Others, particularly Max and the older boys, remained near the elevator, as though ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. "You actually did it," Max said, his customary skepticism tinged with reluctant admiration. "I said I would," Rick replied simply. "Yeah, but adults say lots of things," Max countered. Rick couldn't argue with that. "Fair point. How about a tour?" By the time the press arrived, most of the children had claimed their spaces and begun to settle in. Sarah had taken charge of the kitchen, organizing a lunch service with an efficiency that reminded Rick of her years managing his family's household. The press conference went better than expected. The children were naturally photogenic, the space was impressive, and Rick had prepared a statement that struck the right balance between humility and vision. Even Trevor Wilson seemed momentarily stymied by the lack of obvious angles for attack. "Mr. Harrington," called a reporter from the Times, "what inspired this dramatic change in direction for you and your company?" Rick glanced at Lily, who stood beside Sarah near the back of the room. "Sometimes we need someone to help us see what's been in front of us all along," he said simply. "And the cost?" asked another reporter. $50 million is an extraordinary personal commitment." "The real cost," Rick replied, "would be continuing to ignore these children's potential. Every one of them deserves the chance my father gave me." The questions continued, mostly predictable, until Trevor Wilson stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington," Wilson began, his voice carrying the false concern that was his trademark. "Sources close to your board of directors suggest this project came about very suddenly, following what some describe as erratic behavior on your part. Would you care to address concerns about your state of mind?" A murmur ran through the assembled press. Rick felt rather than saw Martha tense beside him. "My state of mind is excellent, thank you," Rick replied evenly. "Though I would suggest that anyone who considers helping children in need erratic might want to examine their own priorities." Wilson smiled thinly. "And these specific children? How were they selected? There are thousands of homeless youth in New York City." "We're starting with those in our immediate community," Rick explained. "The plan is to expand as we refine our approach." "And your relationship with Sarah Watson?" Wilson pressed. "Our research indicates she was formerly employed by your family before being terminated by you personally. Now she appears to be running this facility. Some might call that unusual." Rick's stomach tightened. Someone had been feeding Wilson information, specific information that wasn't in the press release. "Ms. Watson is a valued member of our team," Rick replied carefully. "Her experience in childcare and household management makes her ideally suited for this role." So her rapid elevation from homeless to housing director has nothing to do with personal relationships? Wilson's insinuation hung in the air. Before Rick could respond, Lily stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington helped us because I saved his life," she said clearly. "The elevator cable broke and he would have been hurt if I hadn't warned him." The room fell silent, all attention turning to the small girl in her new, clean clothes, standing straight-backed and defiant. "And my mom is in charge because she's the best at taking care of people," Lily continued. "She always has been. That's why Mr. Harrington's dad kept her around for 15 years. Wilson seemed momentarily thrown by the direct intervention. "Out of the mouths of babes," he muttered, before pivoting. Which raises another question. What oversight is in place for these children? What prevents this from becoming, shall we say, an inappropriate environment? Rick felt a surge of anger. "That's enough, Mr. Wilson. These children have state-appointed caseworkers, and we've partnered with established social service agencies for ongoing support. If you're implying anything else, I suggest you state it plainly or not at all." The press conference ended shortly after, with Martha skillfully steering the remaining questions towards safer topics, like educational programs and community integration. But the damage had been done. Wilson's insinuations would make the evening news, planting seeds of suspicion and controversy. As the last of the reporters filed out, Jonathan Pierce lingered, his expression one of practiced concern. "Quite a performance," he remarked to Rick, though I noticed the Singapore investors weren't in attendance. "The meeting is Monday," Rick replied tersely. "Hey, you know that." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "If they show up. After Wilson's report airs tonight, they might have second thoughts about partnering with a company whose CEO is being questioned about his judgment." "Did you feed him that information?" Rick asked bluntly. Jonathan's smile was all innocence. "I'm hurt you would think that, though it's interesting that your mind immediately goes to internal sabotage. Perhaps these changes are affecting your paranoia as well as your business sense." Before Rick could respond, Sarah approached with Zoe at her side. "The children would like to show you something," she said, pointedly ignoring Jonathan. Jonathan looked Zoe up and down, his expression calculating. "Charming," he murmured. "Though I wonder what the health department would say about having recently ill children in a food preparation area." Zoe shrank back, and Sarah's expression hardened. "The doctor cleared her," she said firmly, "and the kitchen meets commercial standards." "Of course," Jonathan said smoothly. "I'm merely thinking of liability concerns. As a board member, it's my responsibility." "Your concern is noted," Rick said coldly. "If you'll excuse us." The children had prepared a surprise, a hand-painted banner strung across the dining area that read, "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," in wobbly, multicolored letters. Each child had signed their name, decorating the margins with drawings of stars, hearts, and what appeared to be the Harrington Tower, with tiny stick figures holding hands around it. "We all worked on it," Lily explained proudly. "Even Max." Max shuffled his feet, embarrassed. "I just did the lettering," he muttered. Rick felt something catch in his throat. "It's perfect," he said. "We'll hang it permanently." That evening, as predicted, Trevor Wilson's report aired, a masterpiece of innuendo and selective editing that portrayed Rick as either mentally unstable or engaging in some undefined impropriety. The Singapore investors called to reschedule their Monday meeting, citing a sudden conflict. The board demanded an emergency session for Monday morning. Rick watched it all unfold from his penthouse, where he'd retreated to deal with the mounting administrative crises. Sarah had stayed on the 14th floor with the children, helping them adjust to their new environment. His phone rang, Martha, updating him on the latest developments. "The Post is running a follow-up tomorrow," she reported, "and 3 major shareholders have called expressing concerns about company direction." Rick sighed. "Forward me their numbers. I'll call them personally." "There's more," Martha said hesitantly. "Child Protective Services called. They're sending an inspector Monday morning to ensure the facility meets all legal requirements for housing minors." "That's fine," Rick said. "We've exceeded all the standards." "Rick," Martha paused. "This feels coordinated." "It is," he agreed. "Jonathan's trying to undermine me before the board meeting, probably working with Councilwoman Morgan." "What do you want to do?" Rick considered his options. He could retreat, scale back the project, make concessions to appease the board and the politicians. The path of least resistance, the business smart move. Or he could fight. Prepare a full media packet, he decided. Our financials, the building permits, the social service partnerships, the educational plans, complete transparency, and invite the entire board to tour the facility tomorrow morning. On Saturday, Martha sounded skeptical. If they're concerned enough for an emergency meeting Monday, they should be concerned enough to see what they're voting on, Rick said firmly. And Martha, thank you for everything. After hanging up, Rick poured himself a rare drink and walked to the window. The city glittered below, millions of lights representing millions of lives, most of them just trying to get by, to find some measure of security and happiness in a system that often seemed designed to thwart those simple desires. He'd been part of that system, had benefited enormously from it, had never questioned it until a homeless child had saved his life. The elevator chimed, announcing a visitor. Rick turned, surprised. He wasn't expecting anyone. Lily stood in the entryway, still in her day clothes despite the late hour. Lily? Is everything all right downstairs? She nodded, walking into the living room with uncharacteristic hesitation. Mom's helping Zoe get to sleep. The little kids are all settled. I wanted to check on you. Check on me? Rick was touched by her concern. That man on TV said mean things about you, Lily explained, perching on the edge of the sofa. And Max says the other man, the one with the fake smile, is trying to get you in trouble. Jonathan, Rick supplied. Yeah, him. Lily's expression was serious beyond her years. Are you going to be okay? Rick sat beside her, suddenly aware of how small she was, how vulnerable despite her remarkable resilience. I'll be fine, he assured her. Grown-up problems. Lily studied his face with disconcerting perception. You know, she said finally, before you helped us, whenever bad things happened, we just looked out for each other. That's how we survived. That's very wise, Rick said. So we'll look out for you too, Lily declared, because you're one of us now. The simple statement hit Rick with unexpected force. One of us. When was the last time he'd been part of any genuine community, not the rarefied circles of wealth and influence he occupied professionally, but a true community? People who cared for each other, not out of obligation or advantage, but out of basic human connection. Thank you, Lily, he said, his voice slightly rough. That means a lot to me. She smiled, the worried expression falling away. Mum says I should come back downstairs and not bother you with business stuff. You're never a bother, Rick assured her, but it is getting late. He walked her to the elevator, pressing the button for the 14th floor. As the doors began to close, Lily stuck her hand out, holding them open. Mr. Harrington, we won't let them take our home away, she said with fierce determination. We're good at fighting back. The doors closed on her solemn face, leaving Rick alone with the realization that the stakes were higher than his corporate reputation or even his control of Harrington Investments. For these children, this was about their home, perhaps the first real home some of them had known in years. He returned to his desk, energized by a new resolve. Opening his laptop, he began drafting emails to his lawyers, to sympathetic board members, to journalists he trusted. If Jonathan and his allies wanted a fight, they would get one. As midnight approached, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained only a photograph of Rick's car in the tower's underground garage, the hood open, a shadowy figure leaning inside. The timestamp showed it had been taken just 3 hours earlier. A chill ran down Rick's spine. This wasn't just corporate politics anymore. Someone was sending a very personal warning. His first instinct was to call security, to increase protection for the building, for the children, for Sarah. But a second, more unsettling thought followed. Who could he trust? If someone could access his private garage, who else might be compromised? Rick stared at the image, his newfound purpose crystallizing into something harder, more determined. Whoever was behind this had just made a critical mistake. They had shown their hand, revealed that they were willing to go beyond boardroom maneuvers and media manipulation, and in doing so, they had removed any lingering doubt in Rick's mind about the rightness of his cause. Because people didn't resort to intimidation unless they were truly frightened of what you represented. He saved the image, then deleted the message. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, but tonight he had confirmation that his transformation wasn't just affecting his life, it was threatening a system that depended on people like him looking the other way. The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. Saturday morning arrived with an unwelcome discovery. Rick's Mercedes, the one pictured in the mysterious text, wouldn't start. A mechanic, summoned discreetly and sworn to confidentiality, delivered the disturbing news. "Someone tampered with your brake lines, Mr. Harrington," he reported, showing Rick the clean cuts in the hydraulic system. "And installed this." He held up a small black device. "It's a GPS tracker, professional grade." Rick stared at the device, ice forming in his veins. "Are there any identifiable fingerprints? Serial numbers?" The mechanic shook his head. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing. I've installed new brake lines and swept the car for additional devices. You're clean now, but I should be careful," Rick finished. "Very careful," the mechanic agreed. "This wasn't a prank. Someone wanted to cause an accident." After the mechanic left, Rick called his head of security, a former FBI agent named Davis, who had worked for Harrington Investments for over a decade. "I need a full security audit," Rick explained after showing him the tracker and the photograph. "The building, my home, my office, my car, everything." Davis studied the tracker with professional interest. "This is expensive equipment, not something an amateur would have access to." "Can you trace it?" "Unlikely," Davis admitted, "but I can increase security protocols immediately. And I'd recommend a temporary security detail for you personally." Rick considered the suggestion. "Not just for me, for Sarah Watson and the children as well." Davis raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I'll arrange it, discreetly." The board members began arriving at 10, 7 of the 11, which was better than Rick had expected for a Saturday morning. Jonathan Pierce was conspicuously absent, as were his closest allies. Victor Blackwell, the eldest member, looked uncomfortable but determined as Rick led the group through the newly renovated 14th floor. The children had been briefed on the visit but instructed to go about their normal activities. The result was more effective than any staged presentation could have been. Board members watched as Lily helped younger children with a puzzle, as Max organized a small library of donated books, as Sarah calmly managed the controlled chaos of lunch preparation. "It's not what I expected," admitted Diane Foster, who had been among the most vocal critics at the previous board meeting. "What did you expect?" Rick asked genuinely. Diane gestured vaguely. "Something more institutional? This feels like a home." "That was the goal," Rick confirmed. Victor Blackwell had separated from the group, drawn into an impromptu chess match with Ethan, one of the twins. The boy was giving the septuagenarian a surprisingly competitive game. "Check," Ethan announced, sliding his bishop across the board. Victor chuckled, studying the position with newfound respect. "Well played, young man. Where did you learn to play like that?" "Washington Square Park," Ethan replied. "The old guys there let me watch. Sometimes they let me play if I help set up the tables." Victor nodded, moving his king out of danger. "Your knight is vulnerable now." Ethan frowned, reconsidering his strategy. "Guess I still have a lot to learn." "We all do," Victor said quietly, his eyes finding Rick's across the room. By the time the tour concluded, the mood had shifted. Not unanimous support, certainly, but a tempering of opposition. The abstract problem of homeless children had become specific faces, names, stories. It was harder to dismiss them now. "I still have concerns about the financial impact," Diane said as they waited for the elevator. "But I understand your motivations better now." "And the legal exposure?" asked another board member. "We've structured the foundation to shield the company," Rick assured them. "All liability rests with me personally." Victor Blackwell, who had been silent since his chess match, finally spoke. "William would have approved," he said simply, referring to Rick's father. "He always said business was about more than profit." Coming from his father's oldest friend and business partner, the statement carried weight. Several board members nodded in agreement. As the elevator doors closed on the departing board members, Rick allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The tide was turning, slowly but perceptibly. His phone buzzed. Martha, with news from her network of administrative assistants across the company. Jonathan Pierce had spent the morning meeting with Councilwoman Morgan and 3 major Harrington investors at the Harvard Club. "Not even trying to be subtle anymore," Rick observed. "There's more," Martha said. "CPS called again. They're moving up their inspection to this afternoon, and they're sending someone from the fire marshal's office as well." Rick checked his watch. "That gives us 3 hours. Call our lawyers. Have them meet the inspectors here. Everything needs to be documented." The inspections went exactly as expected. A painstaking examination of every square inch of the facility, every document, every protocol. The CPS worker, a weary woman named Gloria, who had clearly been pressured into the weekend inspection, seemed simultaneously apologetic and thorough. "These sleeping quarters exceed our requirements," she noted, checking items off her extensive list. "And the child-to-adult supervision ratio is well within guidelines." The fire marshal was similarly professional, though more openly sympathetic. "Someone's really putting the screws to you, huh?" he remarked as he verified the emergency exit paths. "This is the third urgent inspection I've been sent on this month, all for Councilwoman Morgan's special requests." "Politics," Rick said diplomatically. "Politics," the fire marshal agreed with a knowing look. "Well, your sprinkler system is up to code, your emergency procedures are properly posted, and your occupancy is well under maximum. I'll file my report tonight." "Thank you," Rick said, genuinely grateful for the man's professionalism. After the inspectors left, Sarah found Rick in the small office that had been set up off the main living area. "That wasn't just routine, was it?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Rick considered downplaying the situation but decided against it. Sarah deserved the truth. "No, someone's trying to find a reason to shut us down." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The children noticed they're worried. "I'm handling it," Rick assured her. "Like you're handling the person who tampered with your car?" Sarah asked quietly. Rick stared at her, startled. "How did you—" "Lily overheard you talking to your security man," Sarah explained. "She's concerned." Rick made a mental note to be more careful about sensitive conversations. "I've increased security for all of us. There's nothing to worry about." Sarah's expression made it clear she wasn't convinced. "Rick, I appreciate everything you're doing, but I need to know if my daughter, if any of these children are in danger because of it." "They're not," Rick said firmly, hoping he was right. "This is about me, about the changes I'm making. Some people aren't happy about it." "Your business partner? The one with the too perfect smile?" "Jonathan, yes." Rick sighed, "among others." Sarah studied him with that same penetrating gaze Lily often used, seeing beyond the composed exterior to the worry beneath. "You know, when you fired me 7 years ago, I was angry. Not just because of the job, but because I thought William's son had turned into exactly the kind of man William despised." The observation stung, but Rick couldn't deny its truth. "You weren't wrong?" "Maybe not then," Sarah conceded. "But people change. You've changed." She paused. "Are you afraid?" "Of Jonathan? No. Not of him," Sarah clarified. "Of becoming someone new, of letting go of who you were." The question hit with surprising force. Was that the real source of his anxiety? Not the external threats, but the internal transformation. The Richard Harrington he'd been for 15 years knew exactly who he was. Ruthless, effective, respected, if not loved. This new version was uncharted territory. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe." Sarah nodded, understanding. "For what it's worth, the man you're becoming reminds me of William. He was tough in business, but never lost sight of what really mattered." Before Rick could respond, the door burst open and Lily rushed in, her expression frantic. "Damon's gone," she exclaimed. "Gone?" Sarah asked, instantly alert. "What do you mean?" "He went out to get his backpack from their old spot near Bryant Park," Lily explained, words tumbling out. "He was supposed to be back an hour ago. Max went to look for him and saw police cars. They're arresting kids and putting them in vans." Rick was already reaching for his phone. "When did this start?" "Just now," Lily said. "Max is hiding, watching. He says they're saying it's a street cleanup operation, but they're only taking the kids." The implications were clear. With the 14th floor facility now housing many of the local homeless children, those who remained on the streets were being swept up, conveniently removing potential beneficiaries of Rick's program. "Call Davis," Rick told Sarah, referring to his head of security. "Tell him to get someone to Bryant Park immediately, then call this number." He scribbled down his lawyer's direct line. "Explain the situation." "Where are you going?" Sarah asked as Rick grabbed his jacket. "To get Damon," he replied, "and to find out who ordered this operation." The scene at Bryant Park was as Lily had described. Police vehicles lined the perimeter. and officers were methodically clearing the areas where homeless individuals typically gathered. The atmosphere wasn't overtly confrontational, but the intent was clear. Remove the visible signs of homelessness, regardless of where those people would go next. Rick spotted Max hiding behind a planter, watching the proceedings with a street kid's practiced invisibility. He approached carefully, not wanting to draw attention to the boy. "Max," he said quietly. "Where's Damon?" Max jumped slightly, then relaxed when he recognized Rick. "They got him already," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Took him in the first van. He was just getting his stuff, his mom's picture and his lucky baseball." Rick felt a surge of anger. Damon was 14, abandoned by his father, separated from his mother who was in rehab. He'd been one of the first to accept Rick's offer of help, serving as a positive influence on the younger children. "Do you know where they're taking them?" Rick asked. Max shook his head. "Processing center, probably. Then different shelters, wherever there's space. That's what they did last time." "Last time? Yeah, they do this every few months. Politicians call it connecting people with services. We call it getting scattered." Max's cynicism was earned from hard experience. Rick scanned the park, noting the methodical way the officers were working. This was coordinated, planned, and given the timing, likely connected to his recent activities. "Stay here," he instructed Max. "My security team is on the way. They'll get you back to the tower safely." "What about Damon?" "I'll find him," Rick promised. It took 7 phone calls, 3 in-person confrontations with increasingly senior police officials, and the direct intervention of his lawyer. But by evening, Rick had located Damon. The boy had been processed through the system with remarkable efficiency, almost as if someone had been waiting for him specifically, and was already at a group home in Queens. "I can't release him to you," the administrator explained, not unkindly. "You're not his legal guardian." "I have his caseworker's approval," Rick argued, showing the hastily obtained documentation. "And the program he's enrolled in has been certified by CPS." The administrator examined the paperwork with exaggerated thoroughness. "Everything seems to be in order, but given the late hour, I think it would be best if Damon stayed overnight. You can return in the morning with more complete documentation." It was a delaying tactic, transparent in its intent. By morning, there would be new objections, new paperwork required. Rick took a different approach. "May I at least speak with him? Let him know I'm here." The administrator hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, Damon's relief at seeing Rick was palpable. The boy's usual tough exterior cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath. "They just grabbed me," he explained, his voice low to avoid being overheard by staff. "Didn't even let me get all my stuff." "I'm going to get you out of here," Rick promised. "First thing tomorrow." Damon looked skeptical. "They'll move me. That's what they do when they don't want someone found." The practiced resignation in his voice sparked fresh anger in Rick. How many times had this child been shuffled through a system that treated him as a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be helped? "Not this time," Rick assured him. "I have people watching this place all night, and my lawyer will be here at 8 a.m. sharp." Some of the tension left Damon's shoulders. "What about the others, Max?" "Safe," Rick confirmed. "Everyone's accounted for except you, and that's about to be corrected." After leaving Damon with promises and his personal phone number for emergencies only, Rick returned to his car where Davis waited. "We've got eyes on all exits," the security chief reported. "If they try to move him, we'll know." "Good," Rick said. "And the surveillance on Jonathan Pierce?" "In position since 5 o'clock. So far he's had dinner with his wife at Le Bernardin, then drinks at the Yale Club with 2 men we're still identifying." Rick nodded, fatigue finally catching up with him. It had been a long day of confrontations and bureaucratic battles. "Take me back to the tower," he instructed. "I need to update Sarah and the others." The children were still awake when he arrived, clustered anxiously in the common area. Their expressions brightened when Rick confirmed Damon was safe and would be returned the next day. "See? I told you Mr. Harrington would fix it," Lily said to the group, her faith unshaken. Max was less convinced. "They'll try again," he predicted darkly. "Different kids, different places. They want us gone." The statement hung in the air, its truth undeniable. This hadn't been a random police action. It was targeted, intentional. A message. "Why do they hate us so much?" asked Emma, the question heartbreaking in its simplicity. "They don't hate you," Sarah assured her. though her eyes met Rick's with shared understanding. They just don't want to see the problems they don't know how to fix. After the children were finally settled for the night, Rick met with Sarah in the small office. Davis had joined them, along with Martha, who had been coordinating legal and media responses throughout the day. "The pattern is clear," Davis summarized. "First discredit you personally, then attack the program through regulatory channels, then target the children directly. This is escalating." "We need to go public," Martha suggested. "Get ahead of the story before they spin it." "With what?" Rick asked. "Accusations against a city councilwoman? Allegations of corporate sabotage? Without proof, we'd be the ones who look unhinged." "So we get proof," Davis said simply. "My team is good, but this would require specialized skills." Rick understood the implication. "Nothing illegal." "Of course not," Davis assured him. "Just thorough." Sarah, who had been quiet during the exchange, finally spoke. "These people, they won't stop, will they? Not until they've destroyed what you're building here." "Probably not," Rick admitted. "Then why?" she asked. "Why risk everything, your company, your reputation, for this?" It was the question at the heart of everything, one Rick had been asking himself since that first day when Lily had saved him from the elevator. The answer came with surprising clarity. "Because it matters," he said simply. "Because I spent 15 years building a fortune and never once used it for anything that actually mattered." Sarah studied him, seeming to weigh his sincerity. "William would be proud," she said finally. "Not of the money or the buildings, of this." The validation shouldn't have meant as much as it did. He was 45 years old, long past seeking parental approval. Yet her words settled something within him, reinforcing his resolve. "We'll protect the children," he promised, "and we'll expand the program, not contract it. This is just the beginning." Martha cleared her throat. "Speaking of beginnings, the Singapore investors have requested a video conference for Monday instead of the in-person meeting. I think they're getting cold feet." "Set it up," Rick instructed, "and prepare contingencies for their withdrawal." "The stock will take a hit," Martha warned. "The board will use it against you." "Let them try," Rick said, a new edge in his voice. "I still control the majority shares. For now," Davis reminded him. "But hostile moves are often preceded by stock manipulation." The observation hung in the air, a reminder that the forces aligned against them had substantial resources and influence. "We'll address each challenge as it comes," Rick decided, starting with getting Damon back tomorrow. After the others had left, Sarah lingered, concern evident in her expression. "You should get some rest," she advised. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Rick nodded, acknowledging his exhaustion. "I'll try." As she turned to leave, Sarah paused. "The children are planning something for you," she said with a small smile. "A thank you celebration. Even with everything happening, they've been working on it all week." "They don't need to thank me," Rick said. "I know," Sarah replied. "That's exactly why they want to." Left alone, Rick sat heavily in his chair, the events of the day weighing on him. Jonathan's machinations, the political pressure, the blatant targeting of the children. It was a coordinated campaign to force him back into line, to abandon this new path. His phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Walk away now. Last warning." Rick stared at the message, feeling not fear but a growing certainty. He was on the right path precisely because it threatened those who benefited from the status quo. His transformation wasn't just personal, it was a challenge to a system that depended on people like him looking the other way. Instead of replying to the text, he opened his contact list and began making calls. If this was war, he would need allies, people of influence who shared his vision, who could help protect what he was building. By midnight, he had spoken with 3 state senators, a prominent media mogul, 2 Silicon Valley billionaires known for their social justice work, and the head of New York's largest charitable foundation. Each conversation ended with the same commitment: support, resources, and public backing when needed. The empire was striking back. But Rick Harrington was no longer fighting alone. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. By Sunday afternoon, Damon had been safely retrieved from the group home and returned to Harrington Tower, his few possessions in a plastic bag. The reunion with the other children was emotional, a reminder of how quickly their makeshift family had bonded. Even Max, typically guarded with his feelings, had given Damon a quick, fierce hug before immediately pretending it hadn't happened. "They tried to tell me I was being transferred to Albany this morning," Damon told Rick privately. "But your lawyer showed up with a judge's order." It confirmed Rick's suspicions about the coordinated nature of the opposition. Someone had wanted Damon, and presumably the other children if they'd been caught, dispersed as quickly and widely as possible. Breaking apart their community would undermine the program and, more critically, remove the visible evidence of its necessity. Sunday brought another development. Reporters from 3 major outlets requested interviews about the innovative approach to youth homelessness at Harrington Tower. The story was gaining traction, shifting from Trevor Wilson's innuendos to genuine interest in the program itself. "This is our opportunity to control the narrative," Martha advised during their afternoon strategy session. "Transparency is our best defense now." Rick agreed, scheduling a media tour for Wednesday. After the board meeting and the Singapore investors' decision, it would either be a victory lap or damage control, but either way, bringing more attention to the children's stories could only help their cause. As the day progressed, Rick found himself drawn into the daily rhythms of the 14th floor. The children had settled into routines, homework sessions supervised by volunteer tutors, meal preparations led by Sarah, recreational activities organized by older teens like Max and Damon. Rick observed it all with growing appreciation for Sarah's organizational skills. She had transformed a collection of traumatized, distrustful children into a functioning community in a matter of days. "You've done amazing work here," he told her, as they watched the younger children engaged in an art project. Sarah smiled, the expression softening the worry lines that had become more pronounced since Damon's incident. "I had 15 years of practice managing your father's household. This is just a larger family." Family. The word resonated unexpectedly. In creating a home for these children, had Rick inadvertently found something he'd been missing himself? "Mr. Harrington," Lily called from across the room, "we need your help with something." The something turned out to be preparations for the thank you celebration Sarah had mentioned. The children had been working on performances, songs, poems, even a short play written by Zoe, and needed an audience for their final rehearsal. "You can't see all of it," Lily explained seriously. "Some parts are surprises, but we need feedback on the beginning." Rick found himself seated in a makeshift theater, watching as Emma and Ethan performed a duet they'd practiced, followed by 3 younger children reciting a poem about finding a home. The earnest efforts brought an unexpected lump to his throat. "What do you think?" Lily asked anxiously when the preview concluded. "It's perfect," Rick assured her. "When is the actual performance?" "Tomorrow night," Lily said, "after your big meeting. Mom said that would be good timing because you'll either be celebrating or need cheering up." Rick laughed, appreciating Sarah's pragmatism. "Smart woman, your mother." Lily nodded solemnly. "She always says that when bad things happen, you need something good to look forward to." Wisdom born of hard experience, Rick reflected. Sarah had faced setback after setback, yet maintained her dignity, her compassion, and her ability to find joy in small moments. It was a resilience he'd only recently begun to understand and appreciate. As evening fell, Rick retreated to his penthouse to prepare for Monday's confrontations. The board meeting would be challenging, but manageable. His alliance-building efforts over the weekend had secured enough support to prevent any drastic action against him. The Singapore investors were a different matter. Their withdrawal could trigger a temporary stock plunge that Jonathan would certainly try to exploit. His phone rang. Davis, with an update. "My team followed the paper trail," the security chief reported. "The tracker on your car was purchased through a shell company that leads back to a security firm regularly employed by Pierce Industries, Jonathan's family company, separate from his role at Harrington Investments. Can we prove he ordered it?" Rick asked. "Not directly," Davis admitted. "There's plausible deniability built into the arrangement, but we did find something else. Records of payments from Pierce Industries to Councilwoman Morgan's Community Development Fund. 6 figures over the past month." The pieces were falling into place. "Political contributions aren't illegal," Rick noted. "No," Davis agreed, "but the timing is suspicious, and my sources say Morgan is preparing to announce a comprehensive homeless enforcement initiative tomorrow, specifically targeting the area around Harrington Tower." It was another escalation, using city resources to disrupt the program and intimidate its participants. The strategy was becoming clear. undermine Rick's corporate position while simultaneously attacking the foundation from multiple angles. "Anything on Trevor Wilson?" Rick asked. "Nothing concrete yet. He's met with Pierce twice in the past week, but journalists meet with business people all the time." After ending the call, Rick stood at his window, watching night settle over Manhattan. The city lights blurred as his focus turned inward, weighing options, considering approaches. The political and business challenges were substantial, but navigable. What troubled him more was the increasing risk to the children and to Sarah. His intercom buzzed, an unexpected visitor. The security feed showed Sarah standing in the private elevator lobby, her expression resolute. "Come in," Rick said, buzzing her up. "Is everything all right downstairs?" "Fine," Sarah assured him as she stepped into the penthouse. "The children are watching a movie. I wanted to talk to you, privately." There was something in her manner, a determination, a decision reached, that made Rick both curious and apprehensive. "Of course. Can I get you anything?" Sarah shook her head, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, if you have tea." Minutes later, they sat in the living room, steam rising from their cups. Sarah was uncharacteristically hesitant, turning her mug in her hands. "I've been offered a job," she finally said. "A good one. Personal assistant to the dean at Columbia's School of Social Work. The hours would work with Lily's school schedule, and the salary is very generous." "That's wonderful," Rick said, genuinely pleased for her. "You'd be perfect for that role." "I have an interview tomorrow," Sarah continued. "A formality," they said. "The position is essentially mine if I want it." "Of course you want it," Rick said, then paused, noting her conflicted expression. "Don't you?" Sarah met his eyes directly. It would mean moving out of the tower. There's subsidized faculty housing that comes with the position, and while Lily could still participate in the after-school programs here, we wouldn't be as involved. Rick understood her concern. "Sarah, that's an incredible opportunity. You should absolutely take it. But the program, the children, they need consistency. With everything that's happening, it feels wrong to leave now." "You wouldn't be leaving," Rick assured her. "You'd be establishing your independence, which is exactly what you said you wanted." He paused. "And what the children need to see modeled." Sarah's relief was visible. "You're sure? Because I could delay accepting or work out a transition period." "I'm positive," Rick interrupted gently. "And selfishly, having someone like you at Columbia could be valuable for the foundation long term. We'll need academic partnerships, research support." Sarah smiled, the tension leaving her shoulders. "I thought the same thing, and it would put me in position to finish my own degree eventually." Rick raised his eyebrows. "You were in school? Community college, part-time, early childhood education? I had to stop when—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. When Rick had fired her, upending her carefully balanced life. "I'm sorry," Rick said, the words inadequate but sincere, "for all of it. The callous way I handled the staff changes, the lack of personal consideration for someone who had been so important to our family." Sarah's expression softened. "You were different then, trying to prove yourself. That's no excuse." "No," she agreed, "but it is an explanation. And watching you change, seeing you fight for these children, it matters, Rick, more than you know." There was something in her voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Rick found himself acutely aware of her presence, not as his former employee, or even as Lily's mother, but as a woman of remarkable strength and grace. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he said quietly. "You organized everything, made it functional, created a real home for them." "We did it together," Sarah corrected him, "and we'll continue to, even if I'm not living here." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Lily checking when she'd return. "I should get back," Sarah said, rising. "The movie will be ending soon." Rick walked her to the elevator. "Good luck tomorrow, though you won't need it. You'll be brilliant." "And you?" Sarah asked. "Your board meeting, the investors?" Rick smiled with more confidence than he felt. "I'll manage." "Yes," Sarah said, studying his face. "I believe you will." After she left, Rick returned to his preparations with renewed purpose. Tomorrow's battles weren't just about his control of Harrington Investments, or even the foundation itself. They were about creating a world where Sarah could reclaim her interrupted dreams, where Lily could grow up with both stability and opportunity, where children like Max and Damon could transform their hard-won resilience into futures worthy of their potential. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect October day in New York. Rick dressed with particular care, his most impeccable suit, his father's cufflinks, a tie that conveyed authority without aggression. Armor for the battles ahead. The board meeting began at 9 and, as predicted, Jonathan Pierce led the opposition. The strategy was transparent. Highlight the Singapore investors' hesitation, emphasize the regulatory complications with the foundation, suggest that Rick's judgment had become compromised by emotional factors. "We're all sympathetic to charitable impulses," Jonathan said smoothly, his practiced sincerity almost convincing. But the scale and speed of these changes, the personal financial commitment, the regulatory attention, it raises legitimate questions about decision-making at the highest levels of our company. Several board members nodded in agreement, but fewer than Rick had expected. His weekend alliance building had evidently been effective. "If I may," interrupted Victor Blackwell, the eldest board member, "I've known Richard since he was a boy. I've watched him grow into a formidable businessman, sometimes at the expense of the broader vision his father maintained." Rick tensed, uncertain where Victor was heading with this. "What I'm seeing now," Victor continued, "is not a deterioration of judgment but a restoration of balance. William Harrington built this company on the principle that profit without purpose is hollow. That principle has been less evident in recent years. The implicit criticism was fair," Rick acknowledged silently. "The foundation is a separate entity," Victor reminded the board. "Its operations don't impact our corporate structure or finances, and the fact that our CEO is demonstrating social responsibility should be celebrated, not questioned." Jonathan's smile tightened. "Noble sentiments, Victor. But sentiment doesn't drive shareholder value. The Singapore withdrawal is not confirmed," Rick interjected. "The video conference is at noon, and regardless of their decision, we have 3 other potential partners already expressing interest." This was a calculated exaggeration. There were preliminary conversations, but nothing concrete. Still, it served its purpose, creating doubt about Jonathan's narrative of impending disaster. The debate continued for another hour, growing increasingly heated, as Jonathan realized his carefully orchestrated coup was failing. By the time the meeting adjourned, no formal action had been taken against Rick or the foundation, though a special committee had been formed to monitor developments, a face-saving measure for the opposition. "Round 1 to you," Martha murmured as they walked back to Rick's office. But Pierce looked dangerous, not defeated. "He is dangerous," Rick agreed, "and this is far from over." The video conference with the Singapore investors went better than expected. While they expressed concerns about the unusual publicity surrounding Harrington Investments, their primary focus remained the financial projections and partnership structure. By the end of the call, they had committed to continuing discussions, postponing rather than canceling the deal. "They're waiting to see who wins this internal battle," Martha assessed after the call ended. "If you maintain control, they'll proceed. If Pierce gains ground, they'll reconsider." Rick nodded, unsurprised. "Standard risk management. I'd do the same in their position." The afternoon brought news from Davis. Councilwoman Morgan's homeless enforcement initiative had been postponed indefinitely after 3 prominent city religious leaders had publicly questioned its timing and intent. Rick's alliance building was bearing fruit. By evening, the immediate corporate and political threats had been temporarily neutralized. Rick returned to the 14th floor for the children's celebration, his mind still processing the day's events and planning for the challenges ahead. He found the common area transformed. The children had created decorations from art supplies and repurposed materials, hanging colorful paper chains and hand-painted signs around the room. A makeshift stage had been constructed at one end, with bed sheets serving as curtains. "Mr. Harrington," Lily exclaimed when she spotted him, "you're just in time. We're about to start." The performance was everything Rick could have hoped for, earnest, occasionally off-key, and deeply moving. The children sang songs about home and belonging, recited poems they'd written about their experiences, and performed a play that told the story of their community's formation. The finale featured all the children on stage, including the typically reluctant Max, singing a song they'd composed themselves. The lyrics were simple but powerful, thanking Rick not just for shelter and food, but for seeing them as people with value and potential. As the last notes faded, the children presented Rick with a large handmade card signed by each of them. Inside, beneath the signatures and drawings, was a message written in Lily's careful handwriting. "Thank you for giving us a home. But most of all, thank you for becoming part of our family." Family. There was that word again, carrying even more weight now. These children, their struggles and triumphs, their resilience and vulnerability, they had become more than a cause or a project. They had become people he cared about deeply, connections that transcended his original philanthropic impulse. As the celebration concluded and the children began cleanup, Sarah approached Rick, her expression radiant. "I got the job," she said simply. "I start next week." "That's wonderful," Rick said, genuinely happy for her. "Columbia is lucky to have you." "Thank you," Sarah replied, "for everything. Your recommendation apparently carried significant weight." Rick shook his head. "I just confirmed what they already knew, that you're exceptional." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken understanding and growing possibilities. The moment was interrupted by Rick's phone. Davis with urgent news. "Jonathan Pierce just called an unauthorized press conference in the Harrington Tower lobby," the security chief reported. "He's making accusations about financial improprieties related to the foundation. Trevor Wilson is there, along with Councilwoman Morgan." Rick's momentary peace shattered. "I'm on my way down. Should I have security remove them?" Davis asked. "No," Rick decided after a moment's thought. "Let them speak, but make sure our legal team is present, recording everything." Sarah, who had overheard enough to understand the situation, touched his arm. "Be careful," she said softly. "Jonathan Pierce strikes me as a man who's most dangerous when he's cornered." Rick nodded, the weight of responsibility settling over him once more. "Keep the children up here. They don't need to witness this." As the elevator carried him down to the lobby, Rick prepared himself for what was coming. Jonathan's desperate move suggested he knew his methodical campaign was failing. This was a last-ditch effort to create a public spectacle, to force a crisis that would require immediate resolution. The lobby was crowded with reporters, Harrington employees, and curious bystanders. Jonathan stood near the central fountain, Councilwoman Morgan and Trevor Wilson flanking him like lieutenants in a carefully choreographed battle formation. "Serious questions about the financial structure of this so-called charitable foundation," Jonathan was saying as Rick approached. "Specifically, the transfer of $50 million of company-controlled assets without proper board approval. It was a deliberate mischaracterization. The funds had come from Rick's personal accounts, not company resources." Jonathan knew this, which made the accusation not just false but potentially libelous. "Additionally," Jonathan continued, "there are regulatory concerns about the unauthorized conversion of commercial space into residential facilities, particularly for minors with complex legal statuses." Again, a calculated distortion. The renovations had followed all legal requirements, with permits properly obtained and inspections passed. Rick stepped forward, his arrival creating an immediate stir among the assembled press. Jonathan faltered momentarily, then recovered with a predatory smile. "Ah, Richard. Perfect timing. Perhaps you'd like to address these concerns directly." The trap was set. React defensively, appear guilty, stay silent, seem complicit. Rick chose a third option. "I'd be happy to," he said calmly, approaching the impromptu podium Jonathan had established. "Though I'm surprised by the forum, given that these matters were addressed in this morning's board meeting, a meeting you attended, Jonathan." Turning to the press, Rick continued with practiced ease. "The Harrington Community Foundation is a separate legal entity from Harrington Investments, funded entirely from my personal assets. The board was informed of its creation as a courtesy, not for approval, which was not required." Jonathan attempted to interject, but Rick continued smoothly. "As for the renovations, all required permits were obtained, all inspections passed, and all regulatory requirements met. In fact, both the Fire Marshal and Child Protective Services have specifically commended the facility's design and operations." Councilwoman Morgan stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington, while your intentions may be admirable, there are community concerns about—" "About what, Councilwoman?" Rick interrupted, his tone still measured but carrying a new edge. "About helping children in need, about providing safe housing and educational opportunities to young people who have been failed by our systems." Morgan bristled. "About proper procedures and community input. Speaking of procedures, Rick interjected, my security team has uncovered some interesting financial connections between Pierce Industries and your Community Development Fund. Substantial connections that coincide remarkably with your sudden interest in zoning enforcement around this building. The councilwoman paled slightly, while Jonathan's expression hardened into something dangerous. Careful, Richard, he warned quietly. You're making accusations you can't support. Actually, came a new voice from the crowd, I believe he can. All heads turned as Victor Blackwell made his way forward, leaning on his cane, but moving with purpose. As head of the board's ethics committee, Victor continued, I've received some very troubling documentation regarding attempts to manipulate company stock, coordinate regulatory harassment, and even endanger Mr. Harrington personally. This was news to Rick. He hadn't shared Davis's findings about the car tampering with Victor or anyone on the board. These allegations will be thoroughly investigated, Victor announced, his voice carrying surprising strength for his age. In the meantime, I suggest this unauthorized press event conclude before additional statements are made that might constitute libel or disclosure of confidential company information. Jonathan's careful composure cracked. You don't have the authority. I believe I do, Victor interrupted, producing a document. As of 3 o'clock today, when a special session of the executive committee voted to suspend you pending investigation of ethics violations. The lobby fell silent, all eyes on Jonathan as he processed this unexpected reversal. For a moment, Rick thought he might physically lash out. Instead, Jonathan's face settled into a cold mask. This isn't over, he said quietly, his words meant for Rick alone. Not by a long shot. As Jonathan stalked toward the exit, Councilwoman Morgan and Trevor Wilson following in his wake, Victor turned to the assembled press. Harrington Investments has always valued community engagement and social responsibility, he stated firmly. The foundation established by Richard Harrington represents a return to those core values, not a departure from them. A formal press briefing will be scheduled for later this week to address any legitimate questions about this initiative. The impromptu crisis averted, the crowd began to disperse. Rick turned to Victor, questions evident in his expression. You moved against Jonathan without telling me, he observed. Victor nodded. After our conversation this weekend, I did some investigating of my own. What I found confirmed your suspicions and revealed even more troubling activities. He paused. Jonathan has been systematically undermining you for years, Richard. The foundation simply gave him an opportunity to accelerate his timeline. Rick absorbed this information, pieces falling into place. Thank you, he said finally, for your support and for your friendship to my father all those years. Victor smiled slightly. William would be proud of the man you're becoming, Richard. It's been a long time coming, but worth the wait. As they walked toward the elevators, Victor added casually, By the way, I've taken the liberty of scheduling interviews with several candidates to replace Jonathan. I think you'll find them more aligned with your evolving vision for the company. Rick raised an eyebrow. Moving quickly, aren't you? At my age, Victor replied dryly, one learns not to waste time. Back on the 14th floor, the children were anxiously awaiting news, having pieced together that something significant was happening from the adults' reactions. Is everything okay? Lily asked immediately. Are they going to make us leave? No, Rick assured her firmly. Everything is fine. Better than fine, actually. We just had to deal with someone who didn't understand what we're trying to build here. The man with the fake smile? Lily asked perceptively. Rick couldn't help but laugh. Yes, him. But he won't be bothering us anymore. As the children returned to their evening activities, Sarah approached Rick, concern evident in her expression. That sounded serious, she said quietly. It was, Rick admitted. Jonathan made his move, but it backfired. Victor Blackwell had already been building a case against him for ethics violations. He's been suspended pending a full investigation. Sarah's relief was visible. So it's over, this round, Rick qualified. Jonathan won't give up easily, but we've gained ground and time. Sarah studied his face. You don't seem as happy as I'd expect, given the victory. Rick considered her observation. It doesn't feel like a victory yet, he admitted. More like the beginning of something bigger, a first step. Sarah nodded, understanding. The real work is just starting, isn't it? Yes, Rick agreed. Building something sustainable, something that outlasts the initial crisis and excitement. That's the real challenge. As they spoke, Lily approached with a plate of cookies the children had made during the celebration. "We saved these for you," she said, offering them to Rick, "because you missed dessert with all the excitement downstairs." The simple gesture, a child thinking of his needs amid her own concerns, touched Rick deeply. "Thank you, Lily. That was very thoughtful." After she left, Rick turned back to Sarah. "Did you tell her about the job and moving?" Sarah nodded. "She's excited about it, actually, especially when I explained that she could still come here after school and that we'd still be part of all this." She gestured to encompass the bustling activity around them. "You will be," Rick confirmed. "Always." The word carried weight beyond its immediate context. A promise, a commitment, a future taking shape between them that neither was quite ready to name, but both could feel developing. As night fell over Manhattan, Rick stood at the window of the 14th floor, watching the city lights bloom against the darkening sky. Behind him, children laughed and talked. Homework was completed, routines were followed. The rhythms of a home, of a family forming from the most unlikely components. One battle had been won, but the war for these children's futures and for the soul of Harrington Investments was just beginning. Jonathan Pierce would regroup, find new allies, try new approaches. The road ahead would be challenging. Yet for the first time in years, perhaps in his entire adult life, Rick Harrington felt completely certain of his path. Whatever came next, he would face it with clear purpose and the strength that comes from fighting for something that truly matters. His phone buzzed with a text from Davis. "Security sweep complete. All monitoring devices removed from your office and apartment. Safe to speak freely now." Another reminder that the threats were real, the opposition determined. But as Rick turned back to the room, watching Sarah organize the evening's activities with quiet efficiency, seeing Lily help a younger child with homework, observing Max and Damon taking their roles as de facto big brothers seriously, he knew with absolute certainty that it was all worth fighting for. This was no longer about atonement for past coldness, or even about the near miss with the elevator that had started it all. It was about the future, these children's futures and his own. A future built on connection rather than acquisition, on compassion rather than competition. A future worth any battle it might require. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. 6 months later, spring sunshine streamed through the windows of the Harrington Community Center, formerly the 14th floor of Harrington Tower, now expanded to include the 13th floor as well. What had begun as an emergency shelter for 15 children had evolved into a comprehensive support system, serving over 50 young people and their families. Rick stood at the back of the classroom, watching as Max led a coding workshop for younger children. The transformation in the once cynical teenager was remarkable. Given responsibility and resources, Max had discovered both a talent for technology and a gift for teaching. He now talked about college, about creating educational apps for disadvantaged youth, about possibilities that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. "He's quite the instructor," observed Dr. Emily Chen, the child psychologist who had joined the foundation as its director of youth services. "NYU's computer science department is already talking scholarship potential." Rick nodded, pride evident in his expression. "He's worked hard." "They all have," Emily agreed, "but having someone believe in them makes all the difference." The past 6 months had brought challenges and victories in equal measure. Jonathan Pierce had launched a legal battle over his suspension, attempting to paint Rick's actions as corporate malfeasance rather than legitimate philanthropy. The case had collapsed when evidence emerged of Jonathan's own ethical violations, including the car tampering incident, which had been traced definitively to a security contractor on Pierce Industries' payroll. Councilwoman Morgan had withdrawn from public view after a series of investigative articles detailed her connections to developers seeking to gentrify neighborhoods around Harrington Tower, developers who viewed homeless services as obstacles to their plans. Her political career effectively ended. She had been replaced by a councilman who actively supported the foundation's work. The Singapore deal had ultimately proceeded, though with modified terms that included significant corporate social responsibility components. Under Rick's guidance, Harrington Investments had begun integrating ethical considerations into all its business decisions, not as window dressing, but as fundamental operating principles. Most importantly, The children were thriving. With stable housing, consistent education, medical care, and psychological support, they were beginning to heal from their various traumas. Some had been reunited with family members who, with proper support, could now care for them. Others were progressing through the system toward permanent placements or independent living programs. "Mr. Harrington," Zoe approached, her once frail frame now healthy, her eyes bright with purpose. "Can I show you something?" She led Rick to a display of artwork in the community room, paintings and drawings created by the children as part of their therapy sessions. Zoe pointed to her own contribution, a remarkably skilled watercolor depicting the Harrington Tower with rays of light emanating from the 14th floor. "It's called The Building That Sees Us," she explained, "because that's what happened. You saw us when nobody else did." Rick studied the painting, moved by its symbolism and the talent it revealed. "It's beautiful, Zoe. You have a real gift." "Dr. Chen says I could go to art school someday," Zoe said, hope and uncertainty mingling in her voice. "Do you think that's possible?" "I think anything is possible for you," Rick replied with complete sincerity. "And the foundation will support your education wherever it takes you." The Harrington Educational Trust was another innovation, a dedicated fund ensuring that any child who passed through their programs would have financial support for higher education or vocational training. It was Rick's answer to the question that had haunted him: what happens to these children when they age out of youth services? His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Meeting running late. Can you pick up Lily from school? Parent-teacher conferences today." The request was routine now, part of the comfortable partnership they had developed over the months. Sarah had excelled in her position at Columbia, quickly becoming indispensable to the dean, while simultaneously pursuing her own degree in social work. Lily split her time between their new apartment near campus and the community center, where she maintained her role as unofficial ambassador and morale officer. Rick's relationship with Sarah had evolved gradually from mutual respect to deep friendship and eventually to something more. Their first official date had been 3 months ago, dinner at a small Italian restaurant with no publicity or pretension. Since then, they had carefully built something meaningful, mindful of the complex dynamics their history created. "Of course," Rick texted back. "Parent-teacher conferences still terrify me, but I'll manage." Sarah's response came quickly. "Just remember to ask about her science project. She's been nervous about it." Rick smiled at the domestic normality of the exchange, so different from the crisis-driven communications that had dominated his life for years. The change wasn't just in his professional priorities, but in how he experienced time itself. Days once measured in deals and acquisitions were now marked by children's milestones, shared meals, quiet evenings with Sarah, and the gradual building of something that felt remarkably like happiness. After ensuring Max had everything needed for his workshop, Rick made his way to the executive elevator, nodding to familiar faces as he passed. The once clear distinction between the business and community spaces of Harrington Tower had blurred. Executives now regularly volunteered in the center. Lawyers offered pro bono assistance to families navigating the system. Marketing professionals helped youth prepare resumes and interview skills. The tower itself had become a model of corporate social integration, drawing visitors from companies around the world seeking to replicate its approach. Rick had embraced the role of reluctant evangelist, using his business credibility to advocate for similar programs in commercial districts nationwide. Outside, spring had transformed Manhattan, trees in the adjacent park sporting fresh green leaves. Rick walked the few blocks to Lily's school, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement and fresh air, another change from his formally scheduled to-the-minute existence. "Mr. Harrington," Lily called, spotting him from the school steps where she waited with a teacher. At 12 and a half, she was on the cusp of adolescence, her childish exuberance gradually giving way to a more measured demeanor, but her smile remained unreservedly joyful when she saw him. "Mum texted you were coming," she explained as she reached him. "Ms. Winters wants to talk about my science project." Ms. Winters, a 30-something teacher with intelligent eyes and practical clothing, extended her hand. "Mr. Harrington, thank you for coming. Lily's project is quite remarkable, actually." The conference revealed what Rick had already suspected. Lily was thriving academically, her natural intelligence flourishing in a stable environment with consistent support. Her science project, a study of urban green spaces and their impact on community well-being, had been selected for a citywide competition. She's combining data analysis with social impact assessment, Ms. Winters explained with evident pride. It's graduate-level thinking, honestly. My mom helped with the survey design, Lily admitted, and Max taught me how to make the graphs on the computer. But the concept and execution are all yours, Rick reminded her. That's what matters. Walking back toward Harrington Tower, Lily chatted about school, friends, and her ongoing role as junior advisor to the foundation. The title had been created specifically for her, acknowledging her unique position as both beneficiary and catalyst for the entire enterprise. Damon got accepted to that summer program at MIT, she reported, and Zoe's painting won first place in the district art show. Oh, and Emma and Ethan are both doing that advanced math thing at Hunter College now. Rick listened, savoring her evident pride in her friend's achievements. The children had formed bonds that went beyond circumstance. They had become a community, supporting each other's growth and celebrating each other's victories. And how about you, he asked. Excited about the science competition? Lily considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Yes, but also nervous. What if the judges don't understand why it matters? Why green spaces aren't just nice but necessary? Then you'll help them understand, Rick said simply. That's what leaders do. Lily glanced up at him, surprised by the characterization. I'm not a leader. Aren't you? Rick countered gently. Who was it that organized the Homework Buddies program? Or convinced the older kids to mentor the younger ones? Or persuaded the building manager to convert that unused courtyard into a community garden? Lily blushed slightly, unused to having her accomplishments listed so directly. That's just helping. Leadership often looks like helping, Rick observed, the best kind anyway. As they reached Harrington Tower, a familiar figure waited by the entrance. Sarah, her meeting evidently concluded earlier than expected. She waved, smiling as they approached. How was the conference? She asked, embracing Lily briefly. Ms. Winters says my project might win, Lily reported, excitement overcoming her earlier modesty. Of course it might, Sarah agreed. It's brilliant, just like you. The three of them entered the building together, moving with the easy familiarity of people accustomed to sharing space and time. In the lobby, a plaque had been installed commemorating the Foundation's establishment. Beneath the formal language and dates was a simple dedication, to those who help us see what matters most. Lily had insisted on the wording, and Rick had found it perfect, acknowledging both her role in his transformation and the broader truth about how change happens. Sometimes we need others to show us what has been in front of us all along. I need to check on the after-school program, Sarah said as they reached the elevators. There's a new volunteer starting today. And I promised Max I'd debug his tutorial program, Lily added. He's stuck on something. Dinner at 7? Rick suggested. I'm cooking. Sarah raised a skeptical eyebrow. Cooking or ordering in and arranging it on plates? Actual cooking, Rick assured her, mock offended. I've been practicing. The domestic normalcy of the exchange still sometimes caught him by surprise. This unfolding life so different from what he had once imagined for himself. The corporate successes and accolades that had once defined his worth now seemed hollow compared to these moments of genuine connection. As Sarah and Lily headed toward the community center floors, Rick continued to his office on the top floor. Though he still served as CEO of Harrington Investments, his approach to the role had fundamentally changed. Business decisions were now evaluated, not just for profit potential, but for social impact. The company had become a leader in ethical investment strategies, attracting partners who shared their evolving values. Martha met him at the elevator, tablet in hand as always. The Tokyo call is in 20 minutes, she reminded him, and the foundation board meeting has been moved to 4 instead of 3. Thank you, Rick said, taking the tablet to review the agenda. Any word from the city on the zoning variance for the Brooklyn expansion? Approved this morning, Martha reported with satisfaction. Construction can begin next month. The Brooklyn project represented the foundation's first expansion beyond Harrington Tower, a former warehouse being converted into a comprehensive youth center serving one of the city's most under-resourced communities. It would become a template for similar developments in cities nationwide. And the quarterly numbers? Rick asked, referring to Harrington Investments' financial performance. Up 8%, Martha said. The Ethical Investment Fund is outperforming projections by 12%. Turns out social responsibility can be profitable. Rick smiled at her dry tone. Don't sound so surprised. You've been saying that for months. Yes, but now we have the data to prove it to the skeptics, Martha pointed out. Speaking of which, Victor called. He wants to discuss succession planning for the foundation. At 74, Victor Blackwell had become the foundation's most passionate advocate, devoting his considerable influence and experience to ensuring its long-term sustainability. His concern for succession planning was characteristic, looking beyond current success to future challenges. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a familiar rhythm of calls, meetings, and decisions, the business of both profit and purpose requiring equal attention to detail. By 6:30, Rick was in his penthouse kitchen, attempting to prepare the dinner he had promised. The space had changed significantly over the past months. Once sterile and impersonal, it now showed evidence of regular visitors. Lily's textbooks on the coffee table, Sarah's reading glasses by the favorite armchair, photographs of foundation events on walls that had previously displayed only abstract art. The elevator chimed, announcing Sarah's arrival. She entered carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression of amused skepticism. It smells surprisingly edible in here, she observed, setting the wine on the counter. I'm impressed. Your confidence is overwhelming, Rick replied dryly, stirring the pasta sauce he'd been laboring over. I told you I've been practicing. Sarah moved beside him, sampling the sauce with a critical expression that softened into approval. Actually good, she admitted, though I'm still not convinced you didn't have professional help. Martha found a cooking course, Rick confessed. Executive basics. Apparently I'm not the only CEO who can't boil water. Sarah laughed, the sound warming the space in a way no design element ever could. Well, I appreciate the effort. Where's Lily? Still debugging with Max. She said they're close to a breakthrough and asked for another hour. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Those two are quite the team. Max's mentor from NYU thinks they could publish their educational app in the university's development journal. At 12 and 16, Rick asked, impressed. Age is increasingly irrelevant in technology, Sarah replied, setting plates on the table, especially when the developers have first-hand experience with the problems they're solving. That was the Foundation's emerging philosophy as well, involving the young people in designing the very programs meant to serve them. The results had been remarkable, creating interventions that addressed real needs rather than adult assumptions about those needs. As they prepared dinner together, moving around the kitchen with comfortable familiarity, Rick found himself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The transformation that had begun with a near miss and a child's warning had expanded in ways he could never have anticipated. Harrington Investments was stronger than ever, its ethical reorientation attracting both talent and investment. The foundation was expanding its reach, developing models that could be replicated nationwide. And personally, Rick had discovered a capacity for connection and purpose that had been dormant for decades. You're thoughtful tonight, Sarah observed as they sat down to eat. Just reflecting, Rick admitted, on how much has changed. How much I've changed. Sarah studied him with the perceptive gaze that still sometimes made him feel transparent. For the better, I think, though I might be biased. Definitely biased, Rick agreed with a smile. But I hope you're right. I am, Sarah said with quiet certainty. The man who fired me 7 years ago wouldn't recognize the man sitting across from me now. The observation was accurate but incomplete. I think he's still here, Rick admitted. That version of me, the driven, sometimes cold businessman, he's just balanced now by something better. Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand. That's how growth works. We don't erase who we were, we integrate it into who we're becoming. Her wisdom, born of hard experience and resilient optimism, remained one of the qualities Rick most admired. Sarah had every reason to be bitter about how life had treated her, yet she approached each day with grace and purpose. I have something to show you, Rick said, reaching for a folder he'd placed on the adjacent chair. The Foundation's 5-year plan. Victor and I have been working on it. Sarah reviewed the document with professional interest, asking astute questions about scaling, funding mechanisms, and evaluation metrics. But when she reached the final page, the governance structure, she paused, her expression shifting to surprise. Executive Director Sarah Watson, she read, looking up at Rick with wide eyes. This is a job offer. A future one, Rick clarified. When you complete your degree. The board unanimously agreed you're the ideal person to lead the foundation long-term. You understand both the mission and the operations better than anyone. Sarah set the document down carefully. Rick, I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide now, he assured her. It's part of succession planning, looking ahead 2 years. It's not that, Sarah said, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. It's everything. From homeless to this, sometimes it doesn't seem real. It's real, Rick said firmly. You earned this, Sarah. Every step, the board sees what I see. Your extraordinary capacity to transform vision into reality. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing. And what about us? She finally asked. If I'm running your foundation, our foundation, Rick corrected gently. And we'd figure it out, the same way we've figured everything else out, together. The word hung in the air between them, carrying implications beyond its immediate context. Together. It had become the foundation of their approach to challenges, to opportunities, to the intertwined future they were gradually building. The elevator chimed again, announcing Lily's return. She bounded into the apartment with characteristic energy, her earlier sophistication giving way to excited adolescence. We fixed it, she announced triumphantly. The app works now. Max says we can start testing with the younger kids tomorrow. Her enthusiasm was contagious, shifting the mood back to celebration. As they ate dinner, Lily described the technical challenges they'd overcome, her explanation peppered with coding terminology that she didn't realize was advanced for her age. And Ms. Chen thinks it could help kids who are just coming into the program, she concluded. You know, the ones who are behind in school because they missed so much. Like you were, Rick thought but didn't say. The transformation in Lily was perhaps the most remarkable of all. From a child fighting for daily survival to a young innovator creating solutions for others facing similar challenges. After dinner, as Lily worked on homework at the dining table, Rick and Sarah moved to the living room with coffee. Through the window, Manhattan glittered below. The city Rick had once viewed primarily as a marketplace now revealed as a complex ecosystem of human needs and possibilities. I've been thinking about your offer, Sarah said quietly, about the foundation directorship. And? Rick asked, careful not to pressure her. I think I'd like to accept, she said thoughtfully, but with conditions. Rick raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Such as? A co-director structure, Sarah proposed. Someone from the business side partnering with someone from the social services side. Complementary expertise. Rick considered the suggestion. That makes sense. We could start looking for candidates. I already have someone in mind for the business side, Sarah interrupted with a small smile. Someone who's demonstrated remarkable growth in understanding social impact. Who has the financial expertise and the personal commitment? It took Rick a moment to understand her implication. Me? But I'm still running Harrington Investments. For now, Sarah agreed. But Victor mentioned you've been talking about transitioning to a chairman role in the next year or two. Less day-to-day management, more strategic direction. Rick hadn't shared those discussions with Sarah, though he shouldn't have been surprised that